Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and it has been a while since we filmed in the bedroom. Please ignore the discoloured door behind me. It comes from cleaning what I believe to be some sort of mould off the door, but it was actually just the paint disappearing, disintegrating, and now we're getting back to the colour that it kind of was before, which was this almost grey, blue colour. And despite the fact that I might be wearing blue now, blue is indeed not one of those colours that inspires sleep. I don't think personally. It was one of those colours you just decorated a boy's room with, wasn't it? Anyway, we're not here to talk about the interior decoration of the late 1990s. We're here to talk about the books that I have been reading this year. I have read a grand total of 43 books this year, and as this was happening, I've said previously about the fact that I hadn't intended to read this many books. I'd been quite happy just sticking to my usual maybe 7 to 10 books a month, but something just came over me that resulted in me listening to a lot of audiobooks and reading poetry and, you know, all of the shorter things that really help to boost your reading. So what we're going to do is we're going to group these books into categories. So I've grouped these books into sections so we can get through them a bit quicker, but know that they were read from January to February. And the first section is audiobooks. I'm even going to have a group within the group here because I'm going to be talking about the next few Terry Pratchett books, Discworld novels that I listened to in the last 2 months. Some of the ones that I've been reading, well, some of the ones that I've been listening to haven't really inspired me the way that the early works did. Nothing has really got me the way that Mort got me when I listened to that. Is it 2 years ago now? So I've actually listened to 6 of the Discworld books this year, and I began to notice some improvements, some of that humour and pace that made me really want to continue listening to these, that captured that British humour that I'm really fond of, brought it to the fantastical environment of Ankh-Morpork. And yet the first one I listened to was Pyramids, which isn't set in Ankh-Morpork at all. It's set in somewhere called Jelly Belly, and again, I think I enjoyed this book and I was really enjoying the story. It was set in this almost Arabian Nights type setting, and I kept thinking, I'm really enjoying this. This is a great story. And then I realised the reason that I was enjoying this book was because it took on a lot of the themes and ideas, indeed even some of the plot aspects that we had seen previously in Mort. So then I wondered, is it possible to actually like a book from the series, or am I just liking the ideas that this book presents, that the author's presenting but is just doing it again? It's just rewriting an earlier book in a different setting. And I don't know whether I'm continuing to listen to the Discworld books now because I want to get through them, or whether I'm hoping for something more. I know that years ago it was really about getting to the 20th book to listen to Hogfather, and then I just downloaded that anyway because it is possible to listen and read these books out of order. And I feel as though I'm trying to figure out why there are so many fans of these books, but there are a lot more misses than there are hits for me in this series. I mean, then I read Guards, which admittedly was a hit. It's perhaps my favourite of all of the Discworld books that I've read, up there with Mort. It follows this character of Carrot who's joining the Night Watch, is it, in Ankh-Morpork, and he's been brought up a dwarf, but he's actually a human, and he doesn't know this. He's been brought up with very dwarfish values, which seem to be very almost Victorian. And I did really enjoy that book because of Carrot's naivety. but I don't know whether this just goes into something I liked seeing in fiction, which was just seeing these fumbling young men, you know, trying to make it in the world and making a few bad decisions along the way. And then we had Eric, and wasn't happy to spend a credit on this really short book that was done in less than an hour and followed characters that I'm not particularly fond of. And then I went on. I listened to Moving Pictures, Reaper Man and Witches Abroad next, and none of them captured for me what I like about the Terry Pratchett books and the Discworld novels. In fact, Reaper Man was one of those books that I was just bored by. Moving Pictures, similar to the tone of Terry Pratchett's other books, it could have just been a carry-on novel. And I don't know. I haven't downloaded the next book, and I just don't know whether I'm going to. I don't know whether to call it a day with the Discworld books, or whether to just wait and see what they've got in my library and try those ones. I was trying to listen to them in order because I think that that's the best way for me to take in these books, but it just seems there's a lot of books. There's a lot of money to be spent on these books, and it did bring up thoughts about what worth I put to literature, but that's a conversation for another day. So yeah, I think I'm going to step back from the Discworld books now, simply because it's definitely become one of those things where when so many of them are being disappointing and it's kind of very much looking for gold in a pile of muck here, it's just got me questioning whether I ought to continue. Sorry, I can hear that my father's come home and he is being incredibly loud, so if you hear him, I can only offer my apologies as he shuffles down the hall. Going away from the Discworld books, I did end up having another disappointing listen. I listened to The Testament of Loki by Joanne M. Harris, and these are the books that she's bringing out based on Norse mythology. And I listened to The Gospel of Loki a few years ago. Really enjoyed that book. I'm a big fan of Joanne Harris's work anyway, and I liked what she was doing with this twist on Norse mythology. However, here we have Loki, after Ragnarok, he has entered into a video game and taken on someone's body through their avatar, and has ended up in the body of a young woman. This book had humour and queerness and all of that great stuff that we like seeing in literature nowadays, and in some ways I do actually wish the book had been longer, because I feel as though I needed more from the book in the end, and it just wasn't necessarily what I had come to expect. I know that Joanne M. Harris can do funny, I know that she is good at what she does, and I do enjoy her writing, but this book just was a miss for me. It had nothing to do with the narrator. It was definitely a science fiction, fantasy-esque romp that talked about gaming, and maybe that's the problem. Maybe because I don't know anything about gaming and it's never been part of my life, I'm unable to sympathise with the character. I don't know what it was, but there was just something there that whilst I was enjoying what Loki was getting up to, it didn't really wow me in any way. Which is similar to another book I'm going to talk about, which was Wondersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is the second Nevermore book, and it's not that it felt like filler. It's not that I felt like I was waiting for another book. This book did indeed go into different areas. It just felt like a replica of the first book. So people are discovering that Morrigan is this Wondersmith, and it meant that she was an outcast again, and I thought we'd come through that, and just seeing her put back in that role, it felt very much like we were getting the same book again, which is a problem I have, in that I feel like these characters should constantly be advancing, and it took us right back to square one, and we had to go through it all again, and we had to go through all the same struggles that she'd had again, And whilst it was nice seeing all these kids come together and figure out teamwork and all that, and it was good to see the friendship she had, and hearing more about the world was great, but it frustrated me. And I know with the first book I talked about, I didn't mind the references to Harry Potter and how much can you say a work has influenced you, or whether you're just paying homage to it. And I got it. I was fine with it. I was fine with some sort of references to Harry Potter. I think we're going to do that with most children's fiction, especially when you did have a lot of publishers calling this the next Harry Potter. It was just disappointing because we had Jupiter North going off and not being there for Morrigan, which is exactly similar to what Dumbledore does in Harry Potter when he keeps disappearing all the flaming time. Sorry for spoilers. And there's still magic in the world, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate what Townsend is trying to do, but I don't think that this was the best sequel in the world. However, I do still think that it's a middle grade book, it's a children's book. I think that children are going to love this. I think that they'll appreciate and be able to sympathise with Morrigan more. Maybe it's the writer in me that wanted more advancement for the character, I don't know, but this one wasn't for me. Then we're going to move on to The Paying Guests by Sarah Waters. Now, the only Sarah Waters book I have read previously was The Little Stranger, and I appreciated the slow-moving prose, and you get that languid prose again. Sometimes it can feel like walking through treacle. This book begins as a somewhat queer love story. This lady called Frances and her mother are having to take in lodgers because after the war they don't have a lot of money, and the Barbers move in. And Frances quickly becomes infatuated with Lillian Barber, and you think you're getting some sort of cookie cut, well, like, you know, you think it's going to be this slow-moving romance, and there is something that happens that changes this book. And I think that Sarah Waters must do this in more of her fiction, where she has this twist. And I think, obviously, it's quite common for literature to have a twist in the tale. And I liked hearing the book narrated, but I do believe the book could have been shorter. I think that it went on a bit, but I really enjoyed how it turned out. That's all I can say. I was really rooting for these characters, and I didn't expect things to end the way that they did. I expected things to get a lot darker and murkier, and in some senses they did. It played with my expectations of a genre and of these characters, and I think that I might end up reading some more of Sarah Waters' fiction, but I do find myself becoming weary of the languid prose as I'm reading it. I really should get through these a bit quicker. I'm going to talk about Lethal White by Robert Galbraith next, and oh my lord, I didn't anticipate enjoying this book. As you know, I haven't enjoyed the last two books from Robert Galbraith. The Silkworm I thought was incredibly predictable. Career of Evil I thought focused too heavily on Robin and Strike's relationship. But then we had this book. Now, admittedly, the first 300 pages, I thought, why are they even here? I understood that they were trying to build up to something. And I think that's the problem. I think that so many people go into these books and they expect them to be different than the crime fiction we're getting generally. They expect them to be something more than crime fiction, and they're not. So, but I think that people were kind of, I think in the writing, this expectation was trying to be met by 300 pages of just nothing before we finally get into the plot. And once it got into that plot, once the bugger was killed, I started to find this book interesting, and it really just proved to me that Robert Galbraith, J.K. Rowling, whatever we want to call them, actually maybe does know what they're doing when it comes to crime fiction. And yeah, I enjoyed this book, and I would read the next book in the series. I was glad that the latter part of this book didn't focus too much on Robin and Strike's relationship, because that has been one of my problems with the earlier books. Now, I know that a few people actually dislike the fact that it didn't focus so much on it, which just it was the whole reason I bought it, because people reviewed it and said, it doesn't focus on the relationship enough. And I'm like, that's what I'm here for. I don't mind romances in crime fiction. I don't mind books that move along in crime fiction, different characters come in and throw spanners in the works all over the place. That's perfectly fine. But when your romance plot is so heavily doing something to your crime plot, the whole genre you're writing in, that's when I have a problem. I did have a little problem with Robin being made a damsel in distress again. If you've read the book, you'll know what I mean. If you're going to read the book, then wait and see what I mean. And that annoyed me. It made me feel as though these books do have a format of Robin being a damsel and getting rescued, but otherwise, whilst the plot was somewhat predictable, whilst you could figure out exactly who the killer was quite quickly, that might be because I've read a lot of crime fiction now, always been watching the genre, so you notice tropes and things, that might be it. If you like crime fiction, then I'd say read it, but yeah, it's definitely just standard crime fiction. There's nothing majorly new or interesting going on here. Then I finally listened to Edgedancer by Brandon Sanderson. This was before I decided to listen to Oathbringer, and I've taken a break from reading Brandon Sanderson because I just found the idea of reading his books somewhat overwhelming. Now, however, I listened to Edgedancer, I listened to Oathbringer, and I'm right back on that bandwagon. Edgedancer just made me smile. It was humorous. It follows this character of Lift who has awesomeness, and I'm not even sure what her magic power was. I was just happy just to hear her story because it was just out there. It was like YA fiction. It was fast-paced, it was thrilling, it was really quick, and I just really enjoyed the characters that she met and her attitude. Her attitude to life was just fascinating and fantastic, and I know that I don't understand half the things that's going on in these books now, and I don't think I need to know. I've been talking to my friend Lindsay, and it's going to be a big series. It's going to be a big series. One day we're going to understand what Sanderson was getting at the entire time. I didn't expect to enjoy Oathbringer. The entire time that I've known this book's coming out, didn't think I was going to like it. Why? Because I don't like Dalinar. I don't like Dalinar. I haven't liked Dalinar since he first stumbled into the Way of Kings. He is one of those characters I find incredibly self-righteous and boring. And the idea of spending over 1,000 pages in his company, 50 hours of listening time, even though it was sped up so I heard it in 25, it irked me. Luckily, we move on, and we get other chapters from other perspectives of other characters that I actually like. This story did move on somewhat, but again, it's 1,000 pages, it's incredibly slow. Sanderson's building up to something and I don't know what yet. Dalinar had this huge I Am Phoenix moment. If anyone's watched the X-Men cartoon or even read the X-Men, when Jean Grey announces she's Phoenix, rises out and, you know, starts her killing spree, he had a bit of a moment like that. And I was wondering just where Sanderson gets his inspiration from, because these books just constantly remind me of cartoons and television shows that I watched as a child. I've seen some people mention they didn't like Shalon's storyline in these books, but I thought, well, in this book in particular, but I really enjoyed it. I thought that it talked about possible mental health issues in a really good way, and we also had some mention of a gay relationship in here and the acceptance of it, which I hadn't expected from Sanderson before, so they're just, you know, he's just throwing all my preconceptions out the window with this book. Yeah, I'm not, once again, not sure where this story's going. I was glad to hear some of Dalinar's backstory, because then that meant, do you know what, Charlie? Maybe you were right not to like this man. There's more talk of gods and the Knight's Radiance and the past, and it was a bit mind-blowing, and it's a bit too much to talk about in this video, but just know that I'm back on the Sanderson bandwagon. Have I read anything else? I finally listened to The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer, and I enjoyed listening to it. I enjoyed what Palmer had to say about art and asking for help with your art, but I still don't feel as though I'm in the position to actually go to people and say to them, do you know what, could you just help me out a bit? I know that I already ask a lot of my friends with asking them to read my fiction and asking them to help me edit the books, and when I actually finish a book it does become a huge community effort of publicising the book and everything, and I have a friend who takes fantastic photographs and I use them to publicise the books, and I have my friends who, as I say, edit the book for me, read the book for me, proofread it. We go through this book well, not thousands of times, quite tens of times to get the book finished and ready for people to see. And yet I still find it difficult to ask for the help to actually publish the thing, which is another reason that we won't be having a book this year. Despite the fact that a few people have been asking about the secret book, it definitely won't be coming out this year. I do not have the funds there to bring out a book, and I don't think that I have enough people behind me to like go to Patreon or go to one of these sites to just ask for a bit of help. So whilst I appreciate what Amanda Palmer was getting at, whilst I really enjoyed hearing a story and really being an advocate for art, it's not for me yet. I listened to Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, jumping on another bandwagon and quickly jumping off it. Don't think I'll be reading Crooked Kingdom. I think that both of these books would have been fine. As one book, I feel as though I'm just missing an entire story, an entire block of the story that could have been there. Whilst I found the book fascinating and I like the characters and I thought that it was a great take on the heist novel, I do believe that I've seen it before. Maybe it's good to introduce young adult readers to the idea of a heist novel, but I just wasn't able to get behind it. I didn't feel like the story was there for me. But tons of other people have read and enjoyed the book, so Leigh Bardugo really doesn't need me as a fan. I had the same thing with Shadow and Bone, to be honest, when I read that when it first came out, when I was still reading young adult literature. I didn't get on with that book, so I don't know why I thought that I would be able to get on with this. She's definitely matured as a writer, and that was great to see, but I know that Leigh Bardugo's writing is not for me, and she definitely doesn't need me in her corner because she has many, many fans. And that's that. Them's the audiobooks that I have listened to in the last few months, and there were a lot there. I talked for a lot longer than I anticipated talking. If you've read any of these books and would like to discuss them, please feel free to do so down in the comments. And if you have any different opinions, throw them at me. If you think I should continue with any series here, or just want to have a chat, let's do that. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.